In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the project management documents known as invoices. Now, in the journey of our pillows, we have already created purchase orders for all of the materials for the the trim, the fabric, and the work order. And now all of the manufacturers and the vendors, which would be the pillow workroom, would be an example of the vendor. Manufacturers are also referred to as vendors as well. They're all going, okay, well, if you want us to make this stuff or send you this stuff, you need to pay for it. And so this is the invoice that is sent for each of these products. Now, let's take a look at this. You can see we got the logo for this was the trim. You can see 3 yards. And you can see here it's to the design company. Now, if we look at this, we could tie this back and go, let's just take a look at it. Let's just zoom back and let's look at that purchase order real quick. Okay, so remember, Kravet, 3 yards, we order it. They want their money. Pro forma, they want the money before they're going to send the material. And so you can see we've got the order number over here. So this purchase order was received by Kravet, and in exchange or in return, Kravet sends the invoice. So let's take a look at that. So you can see invoice number. You can see this is the invoice number on the Kravet side. This is how you would refer to it. And now if the designer had any questions to Kravet about this invoice, they would need this to reference the date of the invoice and the due date for the product, sales order number, shipping information, purchase order number. Now remember the purchase order number, this could be the client name. It could be that number that we saw in the upper right-hand corner of the purchase order. It may have the side mark here. There could be several ways that this information is put in the purchase order, tracking number, and how the product was paid for. And this is really the document that the designer uses to make sure that Kravet or the manufacturer in general got the order right, knows what they need to send, and that it's going to be on its way. Customer number, this is the number that refers to the design firm that's internal to Kravet. So if the design company has a question and they call Kravet, they're going to go, oh, Kravet's either going to ask them, what's the invoice number or what's your customer number? And the invoice number will probably take them directly to this invoice. The customer number, if they enter it, will probably pull up all of the orders that are outstanding for the design company for Kravet. Okay, we can see the information about the materials here. This would match the purchase order. The designer would be very wise to match the information on the invoice to the purchase order to make sure that no mistakes were made on the Kravet side when Kravet was entering the order. Because remember, I'd said in a previous video, it's super important that the information from the specification gets copied correctly into the purchase order, and that now on the invoice that information is also correctly inputted. And it's the designer's job to verify that. So just imagine after you've created 1,000 purchase orders for the living room and all the materials and things inside, then you get 1,000 invoices back, and you have to go through, or someone at the design firm has to go through and make sure that the orders were put in correctly. Because if there is an error and the designer doesn't catch it on the invoice stage, then maybe the incorrect product gets sent, maybe it happens to show up at the pillow workroom and it's not correct, and a pillow gets made. So it's critical. All this stuff is really critical. It's a lot of paperwork. Okay. We can see here there's information about the total shipping and handling, invoice total. Now, this should be close to the cost on the estimate. Now, I'm not going to go back to it quite yet, but the estimate that I've got a copy of it in front of me that I'm looking at. For this trim, it was 3 yards at $79.50 per yard. And so the cost here is correct. The freight may be a little bit higher. We'd have to go look at our proposal to see if we correctly estimated the freight for our client. If not, we may have to ask for a little bit more money for them. You can see this is kind of the payment coupon. You have to detach it and return it to Cravit. And again, it's got all that same information. It looks similar to maybe some of the bills that you've received at your home. So that's the one from Cravit. We can see here's the pillow workroom. We've got information. Once again, the invoice. This goes from the pillow workroom to the design firm. Client is deleted here, but it would go here. Custom pillows for the living room. You can see here the details of the pillow. It has a little bit more information, 20 by 20 pillows. You can see all the information, feathered down, inserts, and lined. So this has some more of that information that I referred to in an earlier video that's maybe understood between the designer and the workroom as standard. You can see here they've got all the payment information. They want checks. They want there's a person if you've got any questions, and then thanking for the business. So that's another invoice. Here's another one. This is the one for those 6 yards of trim. You can see very similar information here. You've got the vendor or the manufacturer. Sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. Billed to the designer, shipped to the designer. And you can see here, we've got the dates, invoice number, kind of some information that's internal to Samuel & Sons. Client name or side mark might be put here. And then you can see here's the information that the designer needs to make sure is correct and matches the specification information and the purchase order information. Okay, and then the last thing that we need to do is now the client has to be invoiced. Recall when we were looking at the video on the client proposal, I was a little surprised that this designer asked for all the money from the client up front for this. Typically, the designer will ask for half of the money up front at the proposal acceptance, and that covers their cost. Remember, it's everything was marked up double, and so the cost is half of what the client pays. And so a lot of times the designer will ask for that 50% up front to cover their costs, and then once the pillow is delivered and the designer has paid for all of the invoices to the manufacturers and vendors and workrooms, etc., then we'll go to the client and go, okay, here's your beautiful pillow. Let me go ahead and get the final payment for it. But you can see in this case, they asked for all the money up front. And so this final invoice, really, there's no money due, right? But in as I said, in typical circumstances and in my experience, I've seen it where it's half up front, and then once the product is delivered and it's perfect, then the balance due will be the final 50% here. But this looks almost exactly like the proposal. The only difference is that it says final invoice instead of the proposal. It's got some of the information here that's required or internal for the design company. And then you can see the information about each product involved in the pillow is put here as well. You can see that the freight here has also been included and shown. You can see quantity, unit, and then that beautiful description of each product, not the ordering information, because this goes to the client. We don't want the client to know that stuff, but just the description and the image, the price, and the total. And so that is the series of invoices that a designer has to deal with, both from the product or vendors to verify the manufacturing information is correct on the order, and then invoicing the client. So remember, there's a lot of paperwork related to getting something as simple as 2 pillows to a client's site. And there's a lot of work for the designer to verify that every step in that process is managed.